and Destiny, page 49. We are talking, the Rav is talking, about the covenant of fate, and he's going through a whole, I'm not going to review everything, but basically he's looking at the ways that we're all connected. The last thing he was saying was that when we have a shared suffering, and so when something happens to a Jew in, as he said it, a Jew in Morocco, if boiling water is poured upon the head of a Jew in Morocco, the fashionably attired Jew in Paris or London has to scream at the top of his voice, and through feeling the pain, he will remain faithful to his people. So that's what he was talking about in the third one. So now a second one. The third one, here we are in the first paragraph of 49. He says, third, shared suffering finds its expression in the awareness of shared responsibility and liability. When Israel went forth from Egypt, Moses and Aaron fell down upon their faces, pleaded with God, and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be wroth, angry with all the congregation? We're talking about Korach. Korach is the one who started the rebellion against Moses and Aaron, saying, well, he was just arguing. The reason he was arguing is because he felt that he should have been the deputy, according to the rabbis, and instead of the one who was appointed, because he felt he was second in line for that. So since he was upset with that, he couldn't just say, I should be the deputy, because nobody would listen to that claim. But what he tries to do is indict the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Ultimately Aaron, but he's indicting, at that point he's indicting people. So when Hashem is about to punish everybody as a rebellion, they say, both Moshe and Aaron say, wait, one guy's sitting, you're going to take out everybody? No good. This prayer accomplished the main intended for it by Moses and Aaron, the shepherds of their people Israel. God agreed that they had acted properly in setting forth their plea, and punished only the congregation of Korach. However, God's display of this particular mode of chesed, of kindness, was only temporary. On the permanent basis, the quote I, is held responsible for the sin of his fellow. If it was in his power to rebuke him, this is a very important writer, the only time you can hold me responsible for somebody else's actions is if I could have rebuked him and he would have listened, to protest against his behavior and to induce him to repent. So I have to have that ability. If I don't have that ability, then I cannot be held responsible for that person. But at the same time, that person is hurting me. Regardless of whether or not I can stop you or stop somebody else from going against Torah, that ultimately hurts me, because we're all one body. Since we're all connected together, so then, just as the old story is, if the left toe is hurting, well, your whole body is racked with pain. It's not just one little piece. If you can isolate that would be tremendous. And some people say, so amputate it, which is what people want to do to other Jews, as it will. We'll cut you off, you won't be part of us anymore, and have a good day. We can't be responsible. Well, you can't just keep amputating everything left and right. You'll have nothing left.
And amputation causes more pain.
Amputation would cause more pain only for the immediate, but not further on, right? Sometimes you have to amputate in order to save the life. Say it again.
The toe might be broken, not just hurt forever.
Well, again, I was using it as an example, but I don't think that people are just going to amputate their toes based upon that. But if they would have to save their life, they would. Okay. And I would go to a doctor before amputating anything, by the way. I don't want people to start, amputating their limbs here. Sorry?
Self-doctor.
Right. I would not advise that, and certainly don't go on Google to find out what you should do. Okay. So a collective ethical halachic responsibility devolves upon the entire Jewish people. The individuals coalesce into one ethico-halachic unit, possessed of one conscience and an all-encompassing normative consciousness. The halacha has already declared that all Jews are guarantors for one another, as I was just saying. Consequently, the halachic ruling is that a person who has already discharged his obligation to fulfill a commandment can still perform the commandment for his fellow Jew who has not as yet performed it, and thereby enable him to discharge his obligation. So an example of this would be, is Rosh Hashanah the only day that I am responsible to hear, obligated to hear the shofar being blown? It's the only day. No other day am I responsible, am I obligated to do it. The fact that we blow it through Elul is only a minhag. The fact that we blow it on Moshe Yom Kippur is only a minhag, in remembrance of the Yovel. The only time that we're obligated, 100% obligated, men are obligated, men above the age of 13 are obligated to hear the shofar, is only on Rosh Hashanah. So what happens? I go to shul and I hear the shofar being blown, and I have a mind to fulfill my mitzvah. Great. Now what happens is I go home, and lo and behold, another male above the age of 13, another Jewish male above the age of 13, has not heard the Megillah for whatever, the shofar for whatever reason, and is not going to be able to go to hear it. So I can, and let's say the person is not able to say the brachot for whatever reasons, I can say the bracha for that guy, and I can blow the shofar for that guy, and fulfill the mitzvah for that guy, because the mitzvah is to hear the shofar, not to blow the shofar, to hear it. So even though I fulfilled my obligation, since this principle of kosher el-revim zeh b'zeh, everybody's integrally tied together, we're all guarantors, I can help that other person fulfill the mitzvah. Unlike eating. If I eat, it doesn't help you. Okay? But even though I fulfilled this mitzvah, I've already fulfilled it. I'm exempted. I did what I had to do. You didn't. So now I can help you out. That's what the halacha is arguing here. And we rule like that. The fact that the first person has already performed the commandment does not result in his being included in the category of those who are exempt from a particular obligation, who cannot enable the many to discharge their obligation. So what's an example of that? A woman is not obligated to hear the shofar at all. There's no obligation whatsoever. So she now comes home from the shul, and there's a man again, same thing. Man above the age of 13, Jewish man who hasn't heard it. She cannot say the blessing. She cannot blow the shofar and exempt him, because she was never obligated. She was exempt from the beginning. So the rule is, if I'm exempt from the mitzvah, I can't help them fulfill the mitzvah at all. I can't. Because it was never part of my mitzvah. You understand, Daniel? It's a very important thing. So as a minor, you're no longer a minor, you're bar mitzvah now. But when you were a minor, and you was in the shul, and you were number 10, guess what? Only according to most opinions, you were worthless that day. Worthless. K13, oh, very important guy. But before that, Now, the truth is, according to some opinions, they would count you. But can you imagine when you guys were 12? 12. And you came to shul, how many, assuming I could count you, I hold by the opinion that we count a minor. How many, I have 2 of you. Does it mean I can count twice? In other words, I have 8 people. I have 8 people in the shul plus you 2, and you're 12. You're now 12. Multiple. I reduced your age. You come to the Torah Center, we make you ageless. Okay, right now you're 12 years old. You're not obligated to bar mitzvah. You're not obligated to mitzvot yet. Now I said, according to some opinions, if you're 9, if I have 9 men and I have a minor, I can count the minor. And you now become the 10th. So what happens if I have 8 and I have 2 minors? Can I count both minors and say, oh, we have 2 minors? What's the difference? 10 people, right? Can you do that? No. Say no. The answer is no. I can only count one of you. The head to the leans, you only went for one. Otherwise, I'd have the whole group of minors. We'd have minyanim every day. What do I care? You could be 12, you could be 12, 10, 5. You all understand who you're praying to, fine, hopefully. Okay? At 5 years old, you should know you're praying to God. So then I would just need, in every day school, you would have all these minyanim. We can't do that. One person, according to some opinions, not everybody agrees, but in that case, we could rely upon you. But you, even though we would rely upon you being number 10, you could not lead services and exempt others. That you don't have the possibility to do. You only could complete the 10 at that point. But you still not, because you're not obligated, you couldn't help out the others to fulfill their obligation. You understand? So that's what I was saying. If any time that there's somebody who's not obligated, they can't help out. But if I am obligated, and even though I fulfilled my obligation, because of the principle of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, we're all guarantors, so that's what we can help the other guy out. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. So the I is not himself exempt, as long as his fellow has not performed the commandment required of him. A special covenant was made in order to effect the mutual arevut, this suretyship of all Jews for one another. This covenant received its expression in the blessings and the curses on Mounts Gerizim and Aval. That's when they crossed the Jordan, and Joshua set up the 6 tribes on Gerizim, 6 tribes on Aval. The Levium were in the middle, and they announced the blessing and the curses. Everybody said amen to that, and we all became, at that point, at that moment in time, we became responsible for each other. It is based upon the idea of peoplehood that God revealed to Moses in Egypt. From the idea of peoplehood, the covenant of mutual arevut directly followed. Moses, the master of prophets, in referring to the covenant of arevut, emphatically proclaimed that he, God, may establish you this day unto himself for a people, and that he, God, may be unto you a God. In speaking thus, he used the same phrases employed to describe the covenant in Egypt, where it says, and I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you for a God. Here, the concept of shared fate has risen from the plane of a socio-political suffering to the plane of ethical halachic arevut, again, the guarantorship. We are all mutually responsible for one another. We are all each other's guarantors, as the verse states, but the things that are revealed belong unto us and our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So shared responsibility is not only a theoretical halachic idea, it is also a central fact in the history of the Jewish people in respect to its relationship to the nations of the world. Our neighbors have always condemned us for the sins of one of us. They have thereby transformed the rhetorical Talmudic query, shall Tuvia sin and Zigud be punished, into a daily reality that does not even surprise anyone. Y'all understand that? Just because one guy sinned, should you punish the other guy for that? What would be the answer to that?
No. Depends on the situation.
Of course not. No. If you sin, if you do something wrong, I can't punish your brother for that. Right? That wouldn't make sense. If you do something wrong, I punish you. But so what Rav Soloveitchik is saying is that collective sin, you do something wrong, we blame your brother and you. Not only you, but we blame everybody.
Well, in the army, Dad, is it really well, Dad? In the army, because you'd say like, don't get in trouble because then you have to punish all of us, and you said that's when you were in the army. So then in the army, that was.
Yes. You collective responsibility works in those sort of areas too.
Right.
But when one guy in the army does something, while it may be a blemish on the armed forces to the world. Only one person is going, like you have Lieutenant Calley in that famous case. He's the only one who got punished, even though he really shouldn't have been punished. According to, I don't know the whole story, but he was only a lieutenant. They had people above him. So really, if you're going to punish somebody, you punish the higher ups.
The guy that got everyone else in trouble gets punished more.
Right.
Because he has 50 guys in that.
Okay. But I'm just saying that's when you don't tell who did it. But here we're talking about God. So if one guy does something, you should punish the other guy? That's not fair. But what he's saying is that the non-Jews have turned this into a daily reality. So it doesn't surprise anyone. The identification of the actions of the individual with the deeds of the people is a fundamental feature of our history. Our enemies will not allow the individual Jew to remain isolated in his private, separate sphere. They take him out of his 4 cubits into the public domain. By the way, he's speaking halachically. Every Jew, every person really, has their personal space. Today they call it personal space, but it's what we call it the Dalet Amot. 4 cubits around us. That's what we can control. In our little sphere, that's what we can control. So he's saying suddenly you take them out of their personal space and you expose them in the public domain, and there they make use of him in order to level a harsh indictment against the entire community. So when Bernie Madoff did something wrong, that was, or Ivan Boesky, or any other the elites who do these things wrong, suddenly the whole world is saying, "Oh, the Jews are like this." It's the most amazing thing. Every Jew suddenly becomes like that. And this criterion they apply only to Jews and to not to other nations. No one has ever accused a particular Russian or Chinese of being an agent of international communism simply because racially he belongs to a people who have instituted a communist regime in their own country and seek to forcibly impose their cruel reign on the entire world. So the only question I would have on that statement, and I'm not sure, he's writing in 56, is when, you'll help me out here historically, when do we imprison the Japanese?
In the 40s and 30s.
So that's what I was thinking. So I don't know how we would argue on that one, because the United States did imprison Japanese because they were Japanese, because we were in the World War. And so if you were Japanese, you were indicted, even though you were American for many years.
Or German.
Sorry?
Or German. Or any other.
No, German we didn't put into concentration camps.
No,
We Americans put Japanese into camps. What they weren't called concentration camps. Internment camps. I mean, they also we weren't killing them. They had schools. I mean, it wasn't anything that the Germans were doing to the Jews. But nonetheless, we rounded them up. Okay, so only because they were Japanese. Am I correct?
And we seized their property.
Right.
In cases too.
So I don't know how he would argue that. That would be an interesting thing. He's not here to answer the question, but he's writing this and saying no other people have. Well, no. In our history, there has been. We know the Japanese were done. So it would be an interesting question if, and he certainly lived through that. That would be one of the interesting questions you could ask on that one. I don't know how. Like I said, I don't know how to answer it, but it would be. It's a fair ball question. In contrast to this logical and humane approach, well, actually, I should wonder one thing. Why were they imprisoning the Japanese? Because we thought they were. For what reason? Did we think that they were going to join the other side, or
they thought they couldn't be trusted and that they would be loyal to the Emperor of Japan?
Okay. So maybe that's how he would answer it. Because they were afraid of the loyalty thing, as compared to here where you're just saying, since Marx is a communist, all Jews must be communist. Maybe that would be the difference. Mm-hmm. Okay. That I could hear a difference. Okay. If anybody's listening at 19 minutes, they can answer the question. So, but in contrast to this logical and humane approach, which is applied to other peoples, the Jewish people as a whole, on account of the deeds of a few Jewish apostates, is labeled as being an adherent of communism. He's very much against communism, you can tell. We have still not been clear of this libel. Again, the various explanations of this phenomenon offered by scholars are unsatisfying. It makes no difference if the root of the problem is assigned to a psychic cognitive sphere, which means, by the way, the psychic cognitive is you're removing the object that's causing the pain. So it's an interesting thing. So you're saying the problem is assigned to removing that problem causing the pain, or the political historical sphere. Some scientific classification is of no value. The phenomenon remains opaque and mysterious. For us, as religious Jews, there is only one answer to this enigma. It is a hand of the covenant of fate that was made in Egypt regarding the absolute uniqueness of the Jewish people, which manifests itself through this otherwise incomprehensible reality. You understand what he's doing here? He's saying, you can't, if just from a secular point of view, you will never be able to rationalize why, because one Jew does something, that all Jews are indicted on that charge. Unlike every other people, nobody else does that. Because one German did something, suddenly all Germans are to be blamed. Because Timothy McVeigh blew up, whatever he did, what did he blow up?
Oklahoma Federal Building.
There you go. Since Tim McVeigh did that, and McVeigh must make him an Irish person. McVeigh, I guess, is Irish by the name, whatever. But since he did it, so either all white people are horrible and bomb things, or all Irish, or whatever it is. Nobody did that. They said he was a Michiganer. He was a one-man Michiganer. Same thing with Jim Jones. Same thing with all these guys. Nobody ever indicted a whole group. But when suddenly one Jew saw something, then he's arguing that everybody's indicted. So it makes no sense. So he says, it only makes sense if you look to the Torah and you see what happened. Since God made us all this group and we're all guarantors for each other, that makes sense. Since we're all connected. So that sense goes all the way through. Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense in the secular world, why do people still that one Jew did something, all the Jews must be like that? Why don't they take through the head wait, one Jew does something, all the Jews do something like that? That's not how, if an Irish person does something, all the Irish people like that? No, that's not logical. Why would we think like this? Is that just the Torah too? The other nations will indict all the Jews, or just people not thinking through it that much?
What the Rav is arguing exactly what you are arguing. He's saying it doesn't make sense. There's no sense to this. So the only thing we as Jews can look at it as, is Kol Yisrael Kol
It
Rev.
doesn't make sense that the other nations are indicting all of us.
Correct. He says it makes no sense. They'll rationalize it. They'll give you 100 different explanations as to why they do it, but they don't make sense. They all have reasons, but it doesn't make sense. So he said the only way we can understand it, because it flies in the face of logic, is Kol Yisrael Rev Zeh. That's what he's saying. So the commandment of the sanctification of the divine name and the prohibition against the desecration of the divine name can be explained very well in the light of this principle of shared responsibility and liability. The actions of the individual are charged to the account of the community. Any sin he commits besmirches the name of Israel in the world. The individual, therefore, must answer not only to his own personal conscience, but also to the collective conscience of the people. If he behaves properly, he sanctifies the name of Israel, and the name of God, and the name of the God of Israel. If he sins, he casts shame and disgrace on the people, and desecrates the name of his God. Which is why we have to worry so much, or raise a voice so much, when somebody wants to do something wrong. That's why we're supposed to correct them. Because whether or not they understand it, they reflect badly on us. And just as we would want to stop our family members, close family members, from embarrassing the family, since we're all one family as Jews, that's what this connection is. So again, we have that responsibility to try our best to change it. Whether or not we can be punished in the other world for this is a different question. But if somebody's going to do something, first of all, you never desecrate God's name because you just thought, oh, you know what, I'm going to desecrate God's name right now. It's always a long history of something behind there. So if we would have loved the person or whatever it was from the beginning and showed this tremendous friendship, that may have stopped the whole thing from unraveling as far as it did. So it's really important to look at the beginning and not always at the end. What did we do wrong to that as a group or as a family? What do we do wrong to that member of the family that they went totally off the rails? So fourth, the shared historical circumstances give rise to shared activity. The obligation to give charity and perform deeds of loving kindness derives its force from the all-penetrating and all-encompassing experience of brotherhood. The Torah, in laying down these commandments, uses the term of ach, brother, instead of reisa, which means fellow. It's so hard to read when they're going from English. I have to figure out what they're trying to say. And it says, and if your brother be waxen poor, he grows poor, then you shall uphold him, and he shall live with you. You shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your needy brother. You shall surely open your hand unto your poor and needy brother in your land. The confrontation with the people's strange and unusual fate-laden existence endows a Jew with a unifying consciousness in the field of social action. The common situation of all Jews without distinction, whether manifested on the objective level as shared historical circumstances or on the subjective level of shared suffering, opens up founts of mercy and loving kindness in the heart of the individual on behalf of his brethren in trouble, which indirectly affects him as well. Maimonides formulated this idea in his unique style, at once highly concise and overflowing with ideas. He says, all Israelites and those who have attached themselves to them are to each other like brothers. Okay, that's what I'm saying. It's a family relationship. As is said, you are the children of the Lord your God. If your brother shows no compassion to brother, who will show compassion to him? And unto whom shall the poor of Israel raise their eyes? Unto the heathens who hate them and persecute them? Their eyes are therefore uplifted solely to their brethren. So what are we doing? We're looking to our brothers to help us out. We're not going to look to the non-Jewish nations because they just hate and persecute us. So what's the use of that? And that was Maimonides, who was not a poor guy in his own right. He was living in the Sultan's, he was taking care of the Sultan. He was a well-respected doctor. And it was unbelievable. He's living in the golden age of Spain. And he feels the hatred. I mean, when you think about who he was and where he was and who he was playing with, if you will, to know that, I mean, he also saw that he did feel it in a real way because his brother what happened? The brother died or something. He had to take over he was going to be learning. That's why he had to change his whole profession. But nonetheless, he's involved in all these different, with all these different people who don't love him because he's a Jew. They love him because he's a good doctor. And so that's why they're keeping him. But like I said, he sees a lot of things. And you're seeing it right here where he's writing it down that, you can't look to the heathens to support you because it's not going to happen. We have stated that it is the consciousness of the fate imposed upon the people against their will and of their terrible isolation that is the source of the people's unity, of their togetherness. It is precisely this consciousness as the source of the people's togetherness that gives rise to the attribute of chesed, of kindness, which summons and stirs the community of fate to achieve a positive mode of togetherness through ongoing joint participation in its own historical circumstances, in its suffering, conscience, and acts of mutual aid. The lonely Jew finds consolation in breaking down the existential barriers of egoism and alienation, joining himself to his fellow and actively connecting himself with the community. The oppressive sense of fate undergoes a positive transformation when individual personal existences blend together to form a new unit, a people. The obligation to love one another stems from the consciousness of this people of fate, this lonely people that inquires into the meaning of his own uniqueness. It is this obligation of love that stands at the very heart of the covenant made in Egypt. So now that was a covenant of faith, of fate. Now we're looking at again, fate is something that's you're the passive person. That's what fate is. Things happen. Destiny is what we acted. That's our active thing. What we're actively doing. So we're going to start this. We won't finish it, but we'll start. So covenant of destiny. He says, what is the nature of the covenant of destiny? Destiny in the life of a people, as in the life of an individual, signifies a deliberate and conscious existence that the people has chosen out of its own free will, and in which it finds a full realization of its historical being. Its existence, in place of simply being the experience of an unalterable reality into which the people have been thrust, now appears as the experience of an act possessing teleological dimensions, replete with movement, ascent, striving, and attaining. The people is embedded in its destiny as a result of its longing for refined, substantive, and purposeful existence. Destiny is a flowing spring of the people's unique exaltation. It is the unceasing stream of a supernal influence that will never dry up as long as the people charts its path in accordance with the divine law. A life of destiny is a life with direction. It is the fruit of cognitive readiness and free choice. So your destiny is what you choose to make it. And if you follow Torah, then you're going to be all set. If you're going to go break the Torah, well, you're charging out a new destiny, and it's not really going to turn out well for you. That's another thing he's saying. The covenant in Egypt was made against the Israelites' will. God took them unto himself for a people without consulting them beforehand. As the verse states, and I will take you to me for a people. So God didn't ask our permission at that point. We were enslaved. By the way, why wouldn't he? Because we were slaves, all right? So if you're going to come to me and I'm in slavery, and you're going to say, I'm going to be your new master. Okay. Like I really have a choice? Say again?
Different kingdom, when you kill the king, like all of his slaves, like, now you're my slaves.
Correct. So that's not right. When one king kills the other, so he inherits the slaves. That's not an act of choice. That's not an act of destiny. That's fate. Somebody else wants you, got me, fine. So that's what he says. I'll take it. Now the covenant at Sinai, in contrast, was first presented to the Israelites before it was made. And again, you look at the Torah in Parshat Yitro, you'll see this. God sent Moshe to the Israelites to bring them to his word. And Moshe returned to God with their response. The response was Naaseh, we will do it. Naaseh v'nishma. Okay. The halacha views the covenant at Sinai as a contract that can be drawn up only with the knowledge and consent of the party assuming obligations for the future. In this instance, the community of Israel. The proclamation, we will do and obey, Naaseh v'nishma, constitutes the foundation of the acceptance of the Torah. If we would not have said Naaseh v'nishma, game over. We would have been dead that day. God would have buried us with a mountain, and the world would have gone back to tohu vavohu, void and emptiness. We wouldn't be having this discussion at all. But since we said Naaseh v'nishma, that's why the world was allowed to be maintained. But that was our choice. We decided at that point to be God's people. Before that, when he took us out of Egypt, there was no choice. One master for the other. Who cares? It's only at Sinai that he gave us a choice to say yes or no. And once we said yes, that was it. We signed the contract, and our kids, it's interesting, the Midrash says that when people were saying, we'll do it, so Hashem says, who's your guarantor? So they said, we'll be our guarantors. No, wrong answer. Animals, wrong answer. They go through a whole thing, and then if I say, our children, that I'll accept. The children of the guarantors? Good. That's why they call Shavuos also the children, the holiday for the children too. They have all the ice cream and everything else to get those kids into the shul. But it's, besides dairy, there's a reason for dairy too, but really it's a very kid-friendly holiday. And it's, but that's why, because our children became the guarantors. For me to be a person dies, but the children and children and children and children, so on and so forth. That's what that's what we gave for a guarantee. So he says, what's the content of the covenant of Sinai? It consists in a special way of life which directs man's existence toward attaining a single goal, a goal beyond the reach of a man of fate, namely man's imitation of his Creator through an act of self-transcendence. The creative activity which suffices the covenant of destiny flows from a source unknown to the man of fate. It derives from man's rebellion against the life of sheer facticity, from the desire. What's the matter?
Are you reading from someplace else? Because it's not.
55.
55? 55 is here. Yeah, I'm on the way.
Second paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay? You're in the middle of the paragraph. So again, it derives from the man's rebellion against the life of sheer facticity and from the desire pulsating within him for more exalted, more supernal modes of being. The deeds of loving kindness and brotherhood, which are interwoven into the covenant at Sinai, have as a motivating force not the Jew's strange sense of isolation, but rather his experience of unity as a people forever betrothed to the one true God. The absolute unity of God is reflected in the unity of the people bound to him eternally. Thou art one, you are one, and your name is one. And who is like unto you and to your people Israel, one nation on earth. Jewish fellowship in this dimension is a result of a special filial relationship the members of this people enjoy with God. It says in the Torah, it says, I should say in the Midrash, that when nations would come to Israel, and they would come through the shipping lanes, and they would land in Zevulun's area, fine. So once you're there, and you get off the ship, what do you like to do? See the land. We're here, let's visit Israel, okay? So what happens? They go throughout Israel, and they realize something is very strange here. In every other nation, the Midrash explains, in every other nation, every section had their own gods, their own ways of eating, their own foods, in other words, their own style of dress. Suddenly, and they had their own churches, their own 1,000 places. Everybody had their own religion. Suddenly, he comes to Israel, and they say, "Wait a second. There's only one God here. There's only one place of worship." Remember, in those days, you have the temple. That's it. Only Shiloh. Only one place of worship where everybody's going. You only have one type of eating, kosher. They never saw this before. And they were saying, what a beautiful thing this must be. As a result of that, when they saw the tremendous unity and love that the Jews were exhibiting, and it was all unified, they said, we have to come to this people. We want to convert. That's what the Midrash says. It's a beautiful Midrash. Okay? But it's saying because we're all together, they didn't see the infighting. When they joined us, then they could figure it out. But until then, we were great. The appearances were great. It says, we are your people, and you are our father. Maimonides emphasized this motif in the passage we cited earlier. At Sinai, God raised on high the covenant of fate, which he made with a community which, against its will, finds itself alone, a community, the members of which performs deeds of loving kindness on behalf of one another, as a result of this externally imposed isolation and separateness, and transformed the covenant of fate into a covenant of destiny, which he made with a community possessing will and desire, a community sanctifying itself and directing itself toward encountering God. The people, quote unquote, the people lacking direction and purpose. The Hebrew word for people, as we have already noted, is related to the word with. They became a nation, which signifies a community possessing a distinct communal countenance and collective physiognomy, which means the act of judging character based on facial features, which I like to call profiling. Okay? It's a fancy word for profiling. So the Hebrew nation for nation is goy, which is related to the word givia, body. So the Am Chesed, the people of loving kindness, was raised on high and became a goy kadosh, a holy nation. Holiness, which itself expresses itself in the form of an authentic mode of being, is the very foundation of the sheer destiny of a nation. When a man of destiny confronts God, he beholds the God of Israel, who reveals himself to man only with his consent and at his invitation. The God of Israel enters into relationship with finite, creaturely man only after the latter has sanctified himself and purified himself from all uncleanness and pollution, and awaits with passion and longing the wondrous encounter. The revelation of the God of Israel does not take place under all circumstances and conditions. Such a revelation demands a special spiritual state as set forth in divine command, be ready for the third day. Without such preparation, such readiness on the part of man, the God of Israel will not just randomly and casually reveal himself. The God of Israel does not take man by surprise. Rather, he responds to man's fervent plea. However, the God of Israel takes no interest in a person who does not passionately yearn for him with a longing that expresses itself in and takes the form of concrete actions. While the God of Hebrews pursues man against his will and takes no heed of his opinions or wishes, the God of Israel consults with man prior to the encounter. Already in Egypt, the Almighty revealed himself to Moses not only as the God of Hebrews, but also to the God of Israel, who awaits man and invites him to serve him. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. So we're seeing a very strong thing here, according to the Rav, that when it comes to the God, the fate of the covenant of fate, God didn't ask our permission. God simply took us out, and you went from being the slaves of Pharaoh to being my servants. Very nice. It's only at Sinai that he gave us a choice. Either yes or no. You want to join, join. You don't want to join, don't join. At this point, you have to make the decision. And it's a very important line what he's saying here. Hashem, the God of Israel, doesn't want a person who's just going to be going with the flow. You want to actually want this relationship. At that point, Hashem wants you to. It's no longer destiny. It's no longer fate. Now Hashem wants us to actively be involved, and the same way we would in our family relationships. No spouse just wants the other spouse to say, "Oh, you're here? Great, okay." We want us to be excited. We want the spouse to be excited when they walk in. We want that love to last forever, and when it doesn't, never. That's when you end up in divorce or worse, complacency. And you live a horrible life at that point. Okay, we'll have to stop here. Any questions? Yeah.
That gives a new depth of meaning to the chosen people.
Okay.
Because they're also the people that choose.
Correct. Right.
They're chosen by God, but they choose God.
Correct.
It's a beautiful circle here.
That's exactly how it works. Exactly how it works.